Hello and welcome to episode 22 of Market Values, the weekly podcast from TransferMarkt that tries to make sense of everything to do with football transfers and their corresponding market values. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Manu Vet. Manu, how are you this week?
Good. It's been an interesting week at TransferMarkt, and I'm glad things are better.
Yes. Any hardcore users of the website will probably have noticed we weren't maybe at full capacity, shall we say, and I think that's all we probably should say on that topic, but we are back. We're back and running, and that means we are once again able to dig through dozens and dozens of stats websites and tables and player profiles and histories and everything every football nerd loves to do, which makes TransferMarkt what it is, Manu. And we've got plenty to discuss on this week's show as a result of that. We have continued our kind of mini series on young players at each kind of top European league that people should keep an eye on. You obviously sat down with Lennart from our German team, talked about three exciting young talents, and I spoke to Gonzalo, who is all the way in the Azores Islands, in, as I described to him, the middle of the ocean, even though it's technically part of Portugal. As I said to him, it's basically halfway to Brazil. And we spoke about three exciting talents in Liga Portugal. So truly all over the world this week. And of course, as always, you are in Vancouver Island as well. So yeah, it's a very global show as always, isn't it?
It is always a very global show, but that's the beauty of this podcast and TransferMarkt in general, that we have people everywhere, which means we can always tap into knowledge about pretty much everywhere as well.
Exactly. And we'll have more league previews as well coming next week as well. We're trying to cover as many of them as we can, even though some have already started. But I think that's okay because we're talking about players who are going to go on for months and months and years and develop into top talent. So it's not exactly something we have to do before the football technically kicks off again. But on that note, Manu, there has been also a lot of transfer news happening since we last spoke on the podcast. A number of big deals have happened over the last kind of couple of days. You know, Sangare to Brentford, Dembele went through earlier this week to Nottingham Forest as well. Those are two ones that stand out to me. There's many others, of course, across Europe, but there's two transfers in particular we wanted to touch on because they feel like quite defining transfers for the summer transfer window, and both broke records in their own right. Of course, talking about Yan Diomande's €125 million move to Real Madrid, and Bruno Guimaraes' €87.5 million move from Newcastle to Arsenal. Of the two of them, which one would you like to start with first, Manu?
Let's start with Bruno, because I think, he is, I'm going to go simply by the smaller transfer fee first. But I also think it's a really fascinating transfer because it's quite a significant package, right? €87.5 million. I think there's add-ons there too. And that always, brings up the price. The same is true of Yan Diomande. It's 125 plus 10 plus 5, right? Which we add when the time comes. But also 28 years old, significantly over market value, central midfielder, player who, for Brazil at the World Cup didn't always do his best, missed a really crucial penalty against Norway, right, in the game that they got eliminated in. But the market is what it is, especially for central midfielders, Premier League proven central midfielders that move within the Premier League. And I think some of the prices that we have seen in that regard are absolutely wild at the moment.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk this summer about the sheer inflation of transfer fees in the Premier League, particularly midfielders. Obviously, Elliot Anderson is the kind of poster boy for that due to his €135 million move to Manchester City. Tottenham have undoubtedly added to that with Sandro Tonali for €108 million, Matheus Fernandes for €99 million. You could also probably include Morgan Rogers in there for €138 million. I know he's more of a attacking player, but he's still technically a midfielder. So I guess, when Arsenal came calling for Bruno Guimaraes, even though Newcastle knew he wanted to leave, even though it seemed inevitable due to the fact that Newcastle already lost a number of players, it also felt like Newcastle would also be able to kind of name their price, and Arsenal have paid it. And remarkably, Manu, it breaks a record held since 2001 when Zinedine Zidane moved to Real Madrid for 77.5 million euros, and now Guimaraes becomes the most expensive centre midfielder, age 20 or over, in the history of the sport. I'm not sure that's a record that any football fan or any football player really wants. Maybe it is. Maybe it's some kind of rebel in that, but it's, you look at the other players on that list, it's Pjanic to Barcelona for 60 million euros, which less said about that, the better. Casemiro to Manchester United for 70 million euros, who I think by the end of his tenure at Old Trafford, he had certainly plenty of kind of fans at Man United. He was always good for a big game goal. But there's also Palhinha, 51 million euros to Bayern Munich, which will probably go down as the club's maybe most expensive flop. And then, there's Fabinho to Saudi Arabia, which doesn't mean a huge amount. So, it's not a great list to be on. Admittedly, Zidane's at the top of it, and anyone besides Zidane's a nice thing, isn't it? He obviously did very well at Real Madrid, but it's interesting that it is interesting, man, how much he's cost, and the fact that Arsenal have gone out and spent that much money on a 28-year-old. I think it shows that Arteta and the club itself have said, well, we've won the Premier League. We got there thanks to some tremendously hard work and some excellent performances, but maybe Arteta was looking at the way that Man City were a wee bit off their usual form. Maybe he's looking at clubs like Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool, thinking they might look better this season. And Arsenal have said, let's just get proven quality in the door to help us maintain our performances from last year, but also defend that Premier League title.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe also make that extra step to win the Champions League, right? They fell so very short, so close to PSG. Penalties is really what it took to pull those two teams apart, and just to have that extra beef or strength in midfield, I think is something that makes a lot of sense, because like everyone always looks at PSG and looks at all the attacking talent, but they forget that they also have like 4 absolute studs in central midfield, right? And they can really play 3 of them, and they have 4 of them. And I think that is maybe the realization here too, that in order to win the biggest competition, the Champions League, you need that absolute power and depth in midfield. And I think that's another realization that came in here. And they're not the only club to realize this. When you look at the lists of transfers this summer, right? Most of the top signings or transfers this summer have been defensive midfielders or central midfielders. The only ones in that top 6, that Bruno Guimaraes is 6th, right, that are not, are Diomande and Rodgers. So I think that's a really fascinating trend as well.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point actually about the PSG comparison, because I think Arteta probably came away from that Champions League final thinking, it was a final where he was more or less not forced to play Miles Lewis-Skelly, but chose to play him over Zubimendi. It was also a period in the season where Declan Rice was really beginning to look like he was running on fumes. And I don't think anyone would begrudge the fact that Arsenal didn't win the Champions League after a really grueling Premier League campaign, but maybe Arteta stepped away from that season thinking, if we had another top midfielder in there, not one who could have just stepped in for Declan Rice, for example, or Zubimendi in the final, but could play 20 or 30 games a season so that Declan Rice looked fully fit at the end of the season, it would have made a big difference to them in that Champions League final. And, I think that's probably what Bruno Guimaraes comes in to do, to be honest with you. I think he is, if you look at his stats, he almost is like this kind of like-for-like replacement for Declan Rice. He's obviously not going to replace Declan Rice, but he can play alongside him or slot in Declan Rice's role, and then, whether it's Miles Lewis-Skelly, although he has been heavily linked with a move away from the club this week, or perhaps more likely Zubamendi alongside him. So I think Arteta likes to have those three options, and technically Mikel Merino is also there as well, even though he has kind of played as a backup striker for most of his time at Arsenal.
Or for Spain.
So it's almost like Guimaraes isn't a first. He isn't coming in as a starter, but he also isn't coming in as a backup. He's something between. And I think it'll probably mean a lot less minutes for Declan Rice, for Zubamendi, and then I guess Guimaraes as well. But as a result, Arsenal will have three super fit and presumably healthy midfielders throughout the whole season, rather than this real over-reliance on Declan Rice this season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it's also probably a reaction to the fact that Man City signed Elliot Anderson, right? Strengthening their own midfield. So yeah, really interesting. I curious to see how it plays out. And then for Newcastle, I wonder if they have any players left at this point.
Yeah, well, for Newcastle, that's a story for another day, I think. But we should probably move on to the next big deal that we wanted to talk about as well, and that's, of course, Yan Diomande. I think we can come to what he means for Real Madrid and what it means for Real Madrid in a minute, Manu, but I also want to just kind of get your take on this, because you have sat down and spoke to him, young man who, although he is an Ivory Coast international, spent most of his upbringing in the United States. His kind of rise to the top of European football over the last kind of 12 or 18 months has just been almost unprecedented, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he moved to the States. He spent some time there at high school, and he played some lower amateur level football. And I mean, the interview is still up on TransferMarkt, right? I spoke to him.
Can we just take a minute to appreciate that? A couple of years ago, this guy was playing amateur football in the United States. There'll be guys.
He was playing high school football.
There'll be guys in the United States who probably played against him, probably sitting in the pub right now thinking, I was playing football against this guy a couple of years ago, and now he's Real Madrid's most expensive signing of all time.
It's a wild story, isn't it? And it's very well documented on our side, because I asked Leipzig when they first signed him, hey, this is a really interesting guy, where like with his background in the United States, can I sit down and interview him? And they were really great and facilitated that. And so I spoke to him in October. And that was just around the time he got his first Ivory Coast call up, and then he just, he went off like a rocket from there. So if you want to have a great career in football, you need to sit down and interview with me first. I think that's the way it goes, right? But yeah, it's an incredible story. And it's also such a fascinating story, because there's so many clubs that could have signed him for nothing, really, and that list is also part of the interview. But there were a couple MLS teams, there were teams in the Premier League, and there was a team in Scotland, Stefan, that also had a look at him and said, nah, not for us. And then CD Leganes ultimately did do it. They did sign him, gave him a chance, and then sold him to Leipzig for 20 million euros. And as far as I understand, they're getting another big cut for this deal now, because they had a sellout clause in this contract, which I think was between 10 and 20%. So there's another financial windfall coming for them. So in the region of 30 million euros is what they got for Diomande, taking a swing at a high school kid. So good for them. But the rise has been remarkable. You could see, I think, when he first arrived in the Bundesliga, that he had the potential to be way better than I think even Leipzig hoped for. I think they signed him as a potential player who they thought, okay, he's going to take 2 or 3 years and then he could be a good player. And then I think he just hit the ground running, 12 goals, 9 assists, right, in 33 Bundesliga games. And I think what Real Madrid are doing here, I think they're going a little bit ahead of the trend. Florentino Perez made the statement that they're going to spend a lot of money on a U20 player this summer. And there was lots of speculations who it could be. And at the end of the day, it was Yan Diomande. And I think they won the race over Liverpool, who were interested, and PSG, who then made a very public statement complaining about the price of the player. which I think is fascinating considering that they have quite a really close working relationship with Leipzig over Harvey Simmons and the many transfers that they have done in the past. But they complained about the agent, etc. Real Madrid had none of these problems. Leipzig were really early on saying, we want a package of around 130 million. They ended up getting that, it is an incredible story. But yeah, there's 3 key lessons. High school football may be better than we think. Join a club that's betting on you, and do sit down and interview with us.
Yeah, if you want to know who's going to end up being one of the most expensive players in the world in a couple of years' time, just keep an eye on who Manu interviews for TransferMarkt. That's usually a sure sign.
I mean, just in fairness, we also had Florian Wirtz before he shot off, right? So our track record isn't that.
Exactly. I think we have to kind of focus on that for a minute, though, because he is Real Madrid's most expensive signing ever, and he joins a club that needs success immediately. They've now got 2 years without a trophy, which is, just almost uncalled for a club like Real Madrid. They've pushed the Jose Mourinho button, smashed the glass and pushed button for emergency. It's got Jose Mourinho's face on it. I think that's what they've gone for this summer. And as we know, Mourinho doesn't wait around for young players to find their feet. You're either good enough or you're not good enough. And I am really intrigued to see how Diomande does here. He obviously does have experience of playing in Spanish football, but we're talking about a player here who has moved after just 36 games at Leipzig. And it felt to me like a lot of times last season, even though he had fantastic moments of brilliance and obviously had plenty of success at Leipzig, he also had lots of downtime. He also had some inconsistencies. He had some games where he wasn't really showing what he could do. I think he showed at the World Cup that he's a player still learning how to play a full 90 minutes at the highest level as well, which was, I felt, quite obvious against Germany for Ivory Coast. So I don't know. I do kind of feel like he's not done anything wrong. He's done everything right, and I'm sure he deserves this move to Real Madrid. But at the end of the day, Manu, Real Madrid have broke their transfer record for a player who's got 36 games to his name in top flight of European football. He's the second highest. It's the second highest profit for a player for any club, based on a player joining from one season and leaving the next. Only Ousmane Dembele, who left Dortmund for a profit of 113 million euros, is higher. But you look at the other players in that list. Number 3rd is Randall Colomwani, a bit of a flop, to be honest. Enzo Fernandez, okay, he's done well at Chelsea. Nick Voldemade to Newcastle, hasn't done very well. Omar Marmoush to Man City, hasn't done very well. Nico Pass, okay, fair enough, he's a very good player. Hugo Ekitike at Liverpool's done okay. Rasmus Højlund to Man United, a flop. And then Victor Osimhen as well. So, and he's obviously done perfectly well himself at Napoli before moving on to Turkey. But it's a mixed bag, I would say, in terms of, these players that get kind of caught up in these moments of supreme hype and then go for huge transfer fees. And this by no means is a Real Madrid problem. It's something that's obviously apparent across the entire transfer window. But I just wonder how much time will be given Manu and whether he'll have the time to develop into the player that he wants to be at Real Madrid.
The one name that stood out to me, and I'm just double checking his stats right here. Now, his transfer history is Ousmane Dembele. That is a very good comparable in terms of how Dortmund signed him from Stade Rennes, right? For relatively high transfer fee at the time, and he just turns out to be this incredible player. Absolutely magnificent. Some of the things he did that first year with Dortmund were, it looked like PlayStation. It was, I remember it so well. It blew our minds in the same way than what Diomande did as a very young kid in his first season in the Bundesliga. It was the development was way faster than we thought. And Dortmund thought they would have way more time to develop him further. And then, Barcelona have to sell Neymar to PSG, have way more money than they should have had, and they go on football manager mode, and they're just in their panic buy Ousmane Dembele because they needed a replacement. And obviously Dembele at the time wasn't at all Neymar. That is an interesting parallel as well, because I feel like this is similar-ish in terms that Real Madrid, as you said, they hit the panic button with Jose Mourinho's face on it, and they needed a star, a young player who was really fascinating, exciting, and all that. But it took really many years afterwards. Dembele I've been fortunate enough to see him live a few times, both at Dortmund, then at Barca, and then at PSG, where I think he's turned into this absolute machine, but a completely different player than he was when he reinvented himself to be a player that won the Ballon d'Or. But it took 6-7 years, right? And it wasn't until his mid-20s, later 20s, until he had the maturity, the understanding, the work rate, and all those sort of things. And that is the risk here, that this could be I think there is no doubt in my mind that Diomande, his potential, his ceiling is potential Ballon d'Or winner. But he's also 18. And it takes maturity, it takes understanding, it takes a coach who develops you. For the Dembele was Luis Enrique, right? Who I think is the best coach in the world. You probably agree with me. And understanding that this is the player he had, and understanding Dembele's potential, and Jose Mourinho, that's a big task now for him. He has to shepherd this career. He has to turn this diamond in the rough into a shining diamond. And find the best role for a player who, he's a winger, a right winger, but is that his best position? Do we know that yet? So I think that is a really important thing, that people who now watch his career and follow his career, they will see the price tag. They will not understand his age, and they will not understand that it takes time. And I just urge you, look at Dembele's career and what happened to him. And patience is going to be very, very important here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what Mourinho prioritizes is one thing, but I think if he has got, if Diomande does have anything going in his favor, it's the fact that Real Madrid do have two kind of recent examples of young players who've joined the club and needed time to develop, and that is both Rodrigo and Vinicius Jr., who joined very young and developed. Eventually, were given the time to develop into top players. After a number of seasons of, they develop into those players. They've kind of in the middle of it right now with Endrick, who, obviously went off on loan at Lyon last season, and rumours suggest he could be off to the Premier League on loan this summer. So that's maybe a bit of a different situation. I can't imagine Diomande will be sent out on loan anytime soon. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to see. But man, you made a good point. Diomande, Dembele, Bellingham as well in that team. All those players have one thing in common, and that's the fact that they all earned their stripes in the Bundesliga. Once upon a time, they were young players that nobody knew anything about. Fortunately, you've got TransferMarkt, and TransferMarkt can tell you who these young players are and which players to keep an eye on. And this week, you sat down with Leonard from our Bundesliga team to discuss potentially the next Bellinghams or the next Diomandes, 3 players in particular. So let's jump into that conversation now and see what you and Leonard had to say.
And I'm now joined by Leonard Gans, a astute member of our German editorial team. Leonard, how's it going?
Hi, nice to be back. Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, good. Really looking forward to doing this. We're going to talk about 3 young players in the German Bundesliga you should keep an eye on. It's quite an easy format that we're doing here. U21 players with a market value of under 21 million euros, which eliminates a bunch of players. But, we still have 3 really interesting names to keep an eye on. And we're going to start with a player, Leonard, in Noel Aseko. A little bit of a convoluted transfer story this summer because he was with Hannover on loan from Bayern Munich. Hannover triggered the buy option. Then Bayern Munich triggered the buyback option with the goal to have him at the club for the summer to see whether he was good enough to play for Bayern Munich. But then Bayern Munich signed Nathaniel Brown from Eintracht Frankfurt. Yes, he plays a different position, but we'll get there in a second. And then also negotiate a separate deal with Eintracht Frankfurt to sell them Noel Aseko. So Aseko no longer at Bayern Munich, at Eintracht Frankfurt. Regardless, a really interesting player, market value 12 million euros. For me, one of those guys that could be pretty quickly a member of Jurgen Klopp's new German national team if things go well. But yeah, what's your assessment on him?
Yeah, he's a great player. As you said, I'm always already have an eye on him for Klopp's national team, because those are the type of players that Klopp is looking for, like young players that are new on the Bundesliga stage that will develop in the next years and will give the German national team a fresh face. And I think Aseko is one of those guys. He's he made 33 caps last season for Hannover, so he was one of their best and most important players, and they almost made it to the Bundesliga. And that already tells you a lot. If he's 19 years of age and he can play a big role in a good club in the second division, then you know he's ready for the Bundesliga at least. As you said, he's a defensive midfielder, but he's not the big strong defensive midfielder. Like he has a good, is a solid build, but he's only 1 meters and 78 centimeters big. So he's like a little bit tinier, and he has that street soccer vibe, I would like to call it, because he has a lot of flair in his game. He's has good speed, very good technique. So I'm very, very excited to see him play in the Bundesliga, and especially at Frankfurt, because they needed a good central midfielder desperately.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you pointed out, like, not the most physical guy, right? So 1 meter 78 is just under 6 feet. If you from based in the UK or the US, and what I thought was really interesting, there's a player, and I mean he's not quite there yet, so bear with me. But Thiago, who played at Bayern Munich, kind of reminds me a little bit of him. Very pressing resistant, very smart on the ball, very good distribution. And I think that's also why originally Bayern Munich were maybe thinking of bringing him back. The problem is, though, if you're a youth player, Leonard, and you sell a youth player to another club, it's pure profit, right? So you can clear your bank accounts a bit more nicely if you are selling a youth player. But yeah, I'm really excited to see Aseko play in the Bundesliga, and I think too, Eintracht Frankfurt also signed Onyeka from Club Brugge, right? Another midfielder. I thought Frankfurt's biggest weakness was almost in midfield. I know they had a lot of defensive issues, but a lot of that was because of the way they put together their midfield. And I think they really solved that problem this year, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so too. They have a very great midfield now. They want to sell Elias Giri still in this summer. So he will probably leave the club, but it's not really necessary to keep him, because, as you said, you have two very good new players. You still have Hugo Larsson. You still have Oscar Højlund, who will develop surely not next season. Now the problem, I think, after the transfer of Nathaniel Brown to Bayern Munich is probably the left back and right back. So they have to maybe sign a new player there. But I'm with you. The midfield looks very strong now. And talking about Bayern again, I was actually kind of surprised that they were like giving Aseko so easily away, because I thought, they thought about keeping him and developing him as a new option, especially after Leon Goretzka left the club, but they decided against it because, as you said, Nathaniel Brown, even though he's a left back, but he can always go into the central midfield and get the ball there and move forward, as we've seen in the World Cup against Curaçao, for example, which was a perfect example where he was more of a playmaker in midfield than a left back. And it's something in modern football that you see more often. And I think Bayern will play this system a lot next season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I thought that there was a good chance he would stay. I mean, you never know. Maybe there is a path back to him to Bayern Munich in the future. But for now, Noel Aseko, market value 12 million euros. One of the best players in the Zweite Bundesliga last year. Definitely a player to watch. I want to move on to Montrell Culbreath, a German American youth international. He's represented both Germany, mostly represented Germany at the youth level. He's played the U16, U17, U18, U19, but he's also played 3 times for the United States at the U16 level. Looks like at the moment he's going to represent Germany, the highest level. He's it plays at Bayer Leverkusen. People might wonder, like, oh, well, what's his America connection? He's a Kaiserslautern product. Anyone who knows a little bit about Kaiserslautern knows that that's one of the largest US colonies in Europe, period, because of the US military base in Ramstein. So, that's the connection right there. But, from what we've seen, his market value has already exploded to 15 million euros, is still only 19. Very exciting young winger. I think we're going to see a lot of him in the Bundesliga this upcoming season.
Yeah, we've already seen a lot of him in the last of the second half of the season at Leverkusen. That was kind of surprised that he had such a big role in the second half of the season, because Leverkusen spent more than 200 million euro last summer. And they have had a lot of big names in the squad, but the one that probably surprised the most, next to Ibrahim Maza, was probably Montrell Culbreath. He signed a contract running until 2030 in January. So that actually points out that he will probably play an even bigger role next season. Even though I'm very excited to see, because he's the perfect fit for a wing back in a back 3 system. But Carlos Martinez, the new head coach of Bayer Leverkusen, plans to play with the back 4. So I think in this system he's more of a right wing than a right back. And I'm very excited to see how he will handle this kind of new situation for him, and if he can sustain that big role as a true right wing at Bayer Leverkusen. That will be very, very excited to see.
Yeah, I mean, he's listed as an attacking midfielder, which can mean all sorts of things these days. But yeah, I just think it's a really fascinating player. So quick, so dynamic. Really quick decision making as well when he has the ball in the final third. And I think we already mentioned Jurgen Klopp with Noel Aseko. Here's another guy, I think, if he does well in the Bundesliga, because of the way Jurgen Klopp likes to play and like the counter pressing and all that sort of stuff, or to use the German word gegenpressing, right, is something that a young player like Culbreath. So if you're listening to this and you're excited, young US talent, he's eligible to play for the United States, I have a sense that Klopp might nail this guy down pretty quickly to make sure he doesn't represent another country.
Yeah, that might be true. And I mean, I would love to see him for the German national team, to be honest, as a German, obviously. That's kind of the perfect system for him. As you said, he's so quick and so dynamic. He's just, whenever you see him on the pitch, he's 90% of the time he's sprinting, running, like no pause. And that's the kind of working attitude that you need for the German national team, and also for Bayer Leverkusen. So I think that's why I always like talents that you can see that they are hungry, and that they want to play more, that they want to work, that they want to improve. And he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys where you just know he will make his path which way, the one way or the other. That's the way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, from one dual national to another, Wael Mohya from Borussia Mönchengladbach, market value 17 million euros. He was the youngest player for Borussia Mönchengladbach in Gladbach's history, younger than Karl-Heinz Flipsen, right? Who I think who set the record 37 years ago. I was actually already around for that, so which is kind of a scary thought now when I see those kind of statistics. He's another really young and exciting player. There were some reports that he may choose Morocco over Germany. I think he himself denied those reports, right? Pretty vehemently that no decision has been
there
made.
were reports that he already made the decision, and then but he said, it's not final yet, so Germany still has a chance.
Yeah, I think Germany announced Jurgen Klopp, and a lot of players maybe had second thoughts about nationality. But yeah, I mean, his current market value is 17 million euros. He's still only 18, right? Despite the fact that he's already played 15 games for Gladbach in the Bundesliga. Made 15 appearances for Gladbach senior team, I should say. Scored 2 goals. I still have a really hard time defining what kind of player he is, so I hope you can do a little bit of a better job than I can, Leonard.
I mean, it's tough because he can play a lot of different roles in the offense, but he's like one of those guys who can play as a wing, but he also can play as a playmaker behind the strikers. So he's very, very also one of those players where you don't really need to put him in one spot on the field. So he can move around everywhere. He's very, very intelligent in knowing where to put himself to get the ball in a good space. So that for his age is a very, very great thing to say about him, because a lot of young players struggle with like the intelligence and presence in playing with elderly guys. So he also has a excellent physical condition, which is very, very remarkable. I saw a video of the Gladbach team running, had a running exercise in preseason, and he was in front of all the experienced players. Like, he was the guy with the best running form. It was like a how do you say it? Like when you run a lot of rounds, not a sprint, but the long distance. And he was the one, in front. So I'm sure he has a lot more to show next year. And I mean, we can tell the people that he was the guy we were when we talked about which 3 players do we want to pick for the episode today. He was the guy we both said first. He was the guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, his name is so very fascinating. I mean, Morocco is also such an interesting country at the moment, I find, for me. Obviously, they're part of the host, like one of the countries that are going to host the World Cup in 4 years. And I saw them at the tournament live and, did a little bit of research on it. And they have some really heavy investment into the national team at the moment. Of course, he's born and raised in Germany, so but he wouldn't be the first to be sort of making the switch, because Morocco has a lot of these kind of kids that have grown up abroad and made the switch. It was Bouya, right, from the French player who made the switch to Morocco as well ahead of the World Cup. So it's a really fascinating kind of story for me. And then he's such an interesting player as well. Anyone who makes a debut in one of the top 5 leagues at 16 right away stands out for me, Leonard.
Yeah. And talking about the possible national switch, a lot of players in the past, whenever they decided to not represent Germany but another nation, it was most of the time because they have seen a better chance to play at the other nation. But to be honest, we can't really say that about Morocco now, because you could argue in the last 5 or 10 years, Morocco was the better national team than Germany. So maybe it's even tougher to like reach the national team level in Morocco than it is in Germany. And when you have a coach like Jurgen Klopp who just asks you to play for Germany, then you might put that into your decision.
Yeah, Morocco, top 6 national team at the moment. They're very, very good. So you're right. I mean, Germany might actually say, listen, you could pick Morocco, but you could pick us and you will actually play. So it's a really interesting point.
Sounds bizarre, but it's true.
Yeah, no, this is the world that we live in now. Of course, it could change. I think there's going to be a lot of change over the next 4 years in German football in particular. But also, as someone who always takes a keen interest in the German national team, there's been a lot of talk about there not being enough young talents coming up. And then I went on our side, the most valuable U21 players in German football. And Leonard, I'm a little bit more optimistic now because Also, we could have picked another 2 or 3 players to present today. So I'm a little bit more optimistic now when it comes to the German national team in the future.
Yeah, we have a lot of great talents. I mean, I think the big question in the future will be how many of those guys will make the step into the world class football, because this year as well, we have a lot of good players, but we have a lack of great players. Like we had Florian Wirtz and Jamal Musiala, who were like top 3 in their position probably, but they dropped down a bit in the last couple of years. So that's a big problem in German football, that we don't have like the world class players. And yeah, as we said, like those guys, they have the potential to reach this level, but they have to continue working. They have to continue get playing time in the Bundesliga, which I hope they get. And then we'll see if they can make it together with Jürgen Klopp to the next European Cup and then the World Cup in 4 years.
Yeah, so stay tuned. And if you want to find out which other U21 players could have qualified, head to our site, go to most valuable players, click Germany, click U21, and it's all right there. Hey, Lennart, this was great. Thank you for joining me once again, and we're going to have you back soon.
Thank you too. Was a pleasure again. See you. Bye.
We continue our summer series looking at young players to keep an eye on ahead of the return of many of Europe's top divisions. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Gonçalo Tristel Santos, who joins us all the way from the beautiful Azores Islands of Portugal. Gonçalo, it's great to have you on the show, sorry. And before we get started, how are you? Are you looking forward to the new season?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here and to be a part of the podcast as well. Yeah, the season already started. We already had good matches in the Portuguese league, even with Benfica and Sporting drawing. So they didn't start the season very well, but we are just in the beginning. And yeah, I'm very excited for the new season. I think we have great teams in the Portuguese league, and it's going to be a great season here in Portugal.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already got the season started in Scotland as well, and there's already been some drama. So it's good that the kind of smaller leagues, if you will, do get a few weeks head start on the bigger leagues, and we can enjoy it for a while before the Premier League and the Liga, etc., dominate. But it's exactly why we have you on the show this week. We have 3 players we do want to talk about, and I'll start with one who actually we've talked about a few times already on the show. We had you on I think back in January, maybe when he moved clubs or something along those lines. That is Porto winger Oskar Pietuszewski. Really exciting young player, Gonçalo, 18 years old, left winger, made the move to Porto for just 8 million euros in January, if I'm not mistaken. He already has a market value of 25 million euros. His market value has already risen since joining Porto, but you suggest him for this episode, so that means you expect him, or you think he's going to do even better this season.
Yeah, it's because Oskar, he had like an immediate impact on the team when he arrived at Porto in January. I think he was only 17 at the time. I don't think anybody will or was expecting him to be a regular starter in the first months of his time here in Portugal. But the truth is that not only he was, and he's a regular starter in the team, but also he was very important to Porto winning the title last season. I think Porto made an almost perfect winter market in January, winter transfermarkt, but Oskar was probably the best player they bought in January. I think he did great, and he's very young. Like I was saying, he was just 17 at the time. He's now 18. So because he's so young and he played so well for Porto in the second half of the season, last season, his market value obviously increased a lot. Like you said, he has already a 25 million euros market value, which is considerably high, I would say, for a player that was in the Polish league last year and it's now in the Portuguese league. But he has already been linked to clubs like Bayern, Borussia Dortmund. So I think he's one of those players that we are going to hear about him a lot in the future. He's probably going to be linked to other big clubs. But I also think that it's important for him to stay at Porto this season. And we actually didn't see him play this season yet because he's injured, or he was. I think he's going to be able to play the next match probably, but he couldn't play against Torriense in the Portuguese Super Cup. He couldn't also play in the first match day of the Portuguese league. But yeah, we are only in the beginning, and I think he will have a lot of opportunities. And I don't think he's going to lose his place in the starting 11 because of this. I think the coach Francesco Farioli trusts him a lot, and he's probably going to be one of the most important Porto players this season.
Yeah, he was also, I just noticed there, also heavily linked with a move to Arsenal this summer. I believe that was before they signed Solis, the left winger, although you never know. But as you said, it seems unlikely that he'll move this summer since he only joined the club 6 months ago. And I think that's something we have to really focus on here. I think people are used to seeing Porto develop young players and, young talents kind of sprouting out of seemingly nowhere and turning into kind of top stars. And obviously Porto have a great history of developing young players and selling them for huge fees. But for this kid to come from Poland, of all places, really, it's a very unusual career move to go to Portugal and already be a starter for Porto. Gonçalo, that strikes me as quite a unique story in terms of Porto, because obviously they're used to Portuguese players, Brazilian players, maybe Spanish players, but here we have this young Polish player who's making a name for himself at Porto and very quickly demanding a starting position in the team.
Yes, Porto usually, especially in the past, because last year's I think Benfica and Sporting made a better job selling their players. But I remember when Porto used to buy a lot of players from Colombia, Argentina, and then sell them for high values. So Porto knows how to do this, but usually they don't buy players in the Polish league. But and I think this was one of the most important things for Oscar to so he could adapt very well to the Portuguese league, was that Porto has other Polish players in the team, like Kivior, former Arsenal player, and Bednarek, who was in the Premier League as well before coming to Portugal. So I think that was very important for Oscar, for such a young player to be in a foreign country, to have those two Polish colleagues in the team. It was very important. And I think that the clubs like Porto, as I was saying, usually likes to buy players in South America. But I think the clubs should keep an eye on this kind of opportunities. If they saw this player like Oscar with 17 years old playing very well in the Polish league, I think it makes sense uh, to risk it. It's a risky move. It was a risky move, but I think it makes sense. And like you said, he was bought for 88 million euros, right? So nowadays is not that high of a fee. So I think it was a good business for Porto, and he's doing very well.
Yeah, absolutely. So his market value right now is 25 million euros, but as Gonçalo has alluded to, it wouldn't be surprising if that increases dramatically this season. And we might be back here in 12 months' time, Gonçalo, talking about him moving to Arsenal or Bayern or Tottenham or whoever else. It's always the way, isn't it? And that's exactly why we do enjoy doing this show. Moving on to another winger who's also probably garnering a lot of attention, and this is the second player that you wanted to touch on today, and that's Gianluca Prestianni, the right winger for Benfica. He's 20 years old. He has a market value of 20 million euros. He's been at the club since 2024 when he signed from Valise, the Argentinian side, from 9 million euros. What is it about Prestianni that impresses you so much, Gonçalo, and what makes you think this season's going to be very important for him?
The thing with Prestianni is that he started very young. So he's so young, yet he's 20 years old, and he already had played a lot of matches for Benfica. He already played for Vélez first team when he was at Argentina. And I think people will remember, at least for now, Prestianni for that controversial episode that we've seen with Vinicius and all that. But like, forget about it. If we don't remember about that, you just have to look at how Prestianni is playing for Benfica. I think he was a bit inconsistent last season, so you could see very good matches of Prestianni at Benfica last season, but he couldn't be that consistent to to go to another level. But in these first matches of the season, I think he's doing very well already. 2 goals and I think 1 or 2 assists, and more than that, his performances are being very strong. I think he's going to be a starter for Benfica. I think there's no question about that. Marco Silva, the new coach, could potentially use his qualities to improve Benfica's style of play, and I think it makes sense because I personally like this kind of wingers that don't have this fear of going 1-to-1 to make a lot of crosses to the forwards and even to shoot, because he's very good at that as well. So I think he's one of the most exciting players here in the Portuguese league right now. And like I said, he's so young, and has already played a lot of matches for the team, for Benfica. And let's see what happens until the end of the market, because some weeks ago, I think there was a Turkish club very interested in him, but they were offering around 20 million euros, which is his current market value. But the truth is that I think that if he plays what he knows and what he can this season, his value is going to increase a lot, and he has everything to be one of the it's not one of the best or the biggest sales of Benfica, because as we know, Benfica already made sales like João Felix for 127 million and Enzo Fernandez for 121 million. So I don't think Prestiani would ever be sold for a value like that. But I think he's going to give a lot of money to Benfica, and if he keeps like this level, playing like this, I'm sure his market value is going to increase a lot throughout the season.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you say about obviously the Vinicius Junior situation, and then the fact that he's been at the club for a while and maybe inconsistent. When you do look at his market value, he is, well, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the 6th or 7th most valuable player in the team. You look at the other players that Benfica have at right wing, there are options there, but some of them are older. I think he's the most valuable right winger they have in that team. And then Benfica obviously have a new head coach in Silva. So do you think things are maybe lining up for him to maybe say this season, okay, I'm finally ready to be a senior member of this team. I'm ready to be a key player. I'm no longer just some kid on the bench still learning my lessons. Obviously, he's ready to mature and develop into a top player for Benfica, perhaps before, as you said, he does earn a move somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly it. This is the season where he has to prove his value, and I think he will do it. He started very well. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a player like this in Marco Silva's style of play for Benfica, and yeah, that's exactly it. I think this is the season where he will prove that he is not only a youngster, he's a starter, he's an important player, and yeah, I think that's what's going to happen this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very interesting to see how he does. He obviously has a market value at the time of recording of 20 million euros. So be very interesting to see how he does. And of course, users can let us know in the market value forums what they think his market value should be, and keep an eye on him over the course of the season. So it'll be very interesting to see how he does at Benfica, and if he does indeed earn that big move. But Gonzalo, move on to the third and final player in this section. And this is a new player for Sporting. In the UK, we call them Sporting Lisbon, and I know people in Portugal hate when we do that, so I'll just go with Sporting. But he's a new,
Fans, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, a new player for Sporting, and Issa Doumbia, who's signed from Venezia for 20.5 million euros this summer. A central midfielder, Gonzalo. I know you maybe can't see a huge amount because I don't think he's played yet for Sporting, unless I might be mistaken.
An official match, and but he was actually very good in the preseason matches.
Okay.
Sporting fans started talking a lot about.
What were your first impressions of him then?
Yeah, very good, and also not only for his quality, but because he can play in several positions. We've seen him already playing on the left, and he's a central midfielder. He also shoots very well. He's good physically, defending, and all that. So I think he's a very complete player. And one of the most interesting things is that Sporting in the last years has been buying players on top leagues, but second tier. Gyökeres was in the Championship. Luis Suarez once in La Liga Dos. So Doumbia came from Venezia. They are now at Serie A, but they were in second division last season. And Sporting is doing this very often to look at this second division players, buy them. I wouldn't say low cost, because these players are costing like around 20 million euros each, so they are not exactly cheap for Portuguese clubs. But it's one more move that makes a lot of sense, because Issa Doumbia had played very well in Italy last season, and Sporting is doing the same again that they did with Gyökeres and Suarez and so on. Like I was saying before, he played really, really well in the preseason. Sporting fans were really surprised about that, because um, people didn't know him, of course, since he was playing in Italian second division. People here in Portugal didn't know him very well, or didn't know him at all, and they were all very surprised. But yeah, the first official match was not that good, not only for him, but because Sporting was winning against Estrela da Amadora 2-0, and then Estrela draw the match, so it was not a very good first game, or very good first match for Issa Doumbia at Sporting, but I think he's going to do great. He has already a good market value of 20 million euros, but keep an eye on this. His market value was only 8 million euros before he moved to Sporting. So I think there is a lot of space to improve. He's older than Oskar and Prestianni. He's already 22 years old, but I think he has a lot of space still to improve and to increase. And I'm sure that if he meets the expectations that people have on him, his market value is going to increase a lot throughout this season.
Yeah, I'm sure if we had Marius on right now, he'd be probably listing a number of Serie A clubs who will be kicking themselves
Probably.
for letting Doumbia leave Italy, because he does seem like a bargain, even if, as you said, it's quite a significant fee for Sporting. I'm intrigued by what you said about where he's played already for Sporting in his team, because people will perhaps look at the players who've left Sporting this summer. You have, I mean, the obvious one is Martin Hjulmand, the key star player and a defence
Yes.
midfielder. There's obviously Yan Diomande, who I know is a central defender, but if I'm not mistaken, can or has played in midfield in the past, perhaps. And then there's more attacking players on the wing, like Alison Santos, Francisco Trancao, and Giovanni Quenda. So, they've lost a number of players in the middle of the park, but they've also lost a number of attacking players out wide. And it's also worth mentioning here, as you alluded to, Doumbia, his record for Venezia was actually really impressive. 8 goals and 6 assists in 37 league games in the Italian second division. So we're talking about a central midfielder who certainly knows how to score and create goals as well, Gonçalo. So would it be too easy to say this guy's here to replace Hjulmand, or do you think he'll play a different role for Sporting this season?
No, because Sporting is not only replacing Hjulmand. Even if we talk only about the midfield, Sporting not only lost Hjulmand, but also Morita. So Sporting is changing almost the whole team, but now that we are talking specifically about the midfield, they are changing the entire midfield, and they are playing differently to what they were playing last season. So it's not easy to say that he's his replacement. However, I would say he's not, because like you said, you were talking about the goals that Doumbia scored in Italy. Hjulmand doesn't have that. It's a different type of player. So I would say that Hjulmand's replacement was Sergi Altimira, that Sporting bought to Betis this summer, or even Silas Anderson, who came from Sweden. They are more defensive midfielders than what Doumbia is, and I was really surprised with this. In at least one or two of the preseason matches, he was playing in the left, because Sporting is also going to sell Pedro Gonçalves, who usually plays on the left. They already bought. No, it wasn't. They didn't bought. They received Jesse Derry from Chelsea on loan. So yeah, they have a new winger, but Rui Borges sometimes wants to play with a true winger, so to speak, on one side, and to have like a player more close to a midfielder on the other side, usually on the left. That was what Pedro Gonçalves was doing at Sporting until last season. And at least Rui Borges, the Sporting's coach, he tried to do the same with Doumbia in at least one or two matches in the preseason. I don't know if he's going to do that again in the future, but I think so, because his performances were very acceptable, considering he was not a player used to play on that position. But like I said before, I think Issa Doumbia can do at least 3-4 different positions for Sporting in the field, and that's probably going to be one of the most interesting things to see about him throughout the season.
Yeah, well, I just checked his market value forum thread, and there's already people discussing how well he's played for Sporting in pre-season and suggesting his market value should already rise to 30 million euros. And then a more, maybe, shall I say, experienced user in the forum has had to let that person know that we can't usually use pre-season games as a way to to change a player's market value. But obviously the buzz is already beginning about Doumbia, so it'll be really, really interested to see how he does at Sporting. And one user does point out that if he has one or two good seasons at Sporting, you could very easily see him moving to the Premier League for 60 million euros or something.
Probably, I think he would fit in the Premier League for his style of play. Like I said, we don't know him very well already here in Portugal, but for what I see in these first matches, yeah, he could fit in the Premier League, but let's see what happens.
Yes, exactly. Let's see what happens. But as always, it's great to talk about these young players on the show so we can let people know about them before they do end up in the Premier League. And people can obviously brag about it in the pub when they know all these things. And that's what TransferMarkt is all about, bragging to your football friends in the pub. But Gonçalo, I think that's all the time we have left for. And all I'd add is that if you guys do want to discuss the market values of any of these players, as I said, head to their player profile on TransferMarkt, and down the right-hand side, you will see a widget for you to vote on their market values and a link to the forum to discuss it with other users. But Gonçalo, I'll let you get back to the sunshine and the beautiful nature side of your home, and we'll hopefully have you back on the show soon. Well, weirdly enough, it's quite sunny here in Scotland, so that must be one for the history books. Anyway, until next time, thank you so much, Gonçalo.
Thank you.